Hey everyone, Trueslider Gaming here. So this is just going to be the kind of abridged episode before we jump back in with the Ranger. I just wanted to show everyone who hadn't had a chance to play the game the 7 different classes that are available. Kind of going to do more from the class I like the least, and then move on to the classes that I think are probably the top 3 best for solo and co-op play. So the character I'm currently playing is the Paladin, very melee focused. A lot of what he does is based around primary attack. So this is your main chop. Leveling up the main chop increases the amount of AoE arc you actually get, as well as probably has some of the better big steps up when it comes to just physical damage done. In terms of skills, the first skill you get is the charge, which allows you to charge, hit objects in the way, and it's more like an escape mechanism than damage. So, as you see, I kind of just like kamikazed into all those enemies there. And so, of course, what would a paladin be without a heal? So, the second skill that he obtains is Lay on Hands. I believe this is only level 1. This guy is like level 4, so not going to be able to touch too much on how the end game is for him. But he does get Lay on Hands. Everyone inside that little AoE is going to get healed. I believe it's base 2 health plus 1% of your total health per tick. So it's a healthy amount of life. Considering the fact that it only takes 30 mana, he's probably more suited as an off heal than a main heal. But still, you're looking at the guy who's going to be taking the most damage, getting the most damage reduction, and standing in front, making sure your squishies don't die. Now his fourth ability, his active ability, is a kind of, I think, a quality of life, and it's Whirlwind. So, if you might have noticed, if you overheard the sounds, I'm not sure whether this was just like intentional or whether, I don't know, it's or whether it's just like the programming that went into it. But when you whirlwind, you can auto attack, so it's kind of like having a nice little bit of extra damage, but more it'll probably tie into the passives that the paladin gets. So the first passive that he gets is just a shield blocking. So projectiles within a 90-degree arc that is in front of you. So I guess it'd be 90 degrees. You have a 90% or blocks most incoming projectiles within a 90-degree arc, but it also gives you passive chance to block. The chance to block is always 25%, but it scales up, so you have a 25% chance to block 5, 10, 15, 20, and eventually 25 damage. The next ability that he gets that you don't get to see is a small chance to stun on melee attack. So if you see, I just kind of blocked the... Come on. Easy. So, blocking projectiles, super sweet. You know, definitely good. That one passive where swinging the weapon, every time you hit the enemy, you have, I believe it starts out as a 10% chance to stun for 1.5 seconds, and then the max level is, I believe, a 25% chance to stun for 2.25 seconds. So it doesn't feel like too much, but when you start getting into combos, when you start getting faster attack speed, it really does feel like it's a solid damage mitigation ability. So yeah, and then finally, the last passive that I can't show you, probably should have done this in town rather than showing you all the fun whirlwinds and all that, is it applies kind of like additional magic damage. So you go from doing just pure physical damage into hybrid damage. It's not too much. The first rank is, I think, 12 magical damage per hit. And then the final rank, when you're looking at tier 5 upgrades, are going to be I believe it's 24 magical damage on top of your regular attack damage. And I believe the regular attack damage as a base at tier 5 is 52. So he does pretty decent damage. Like, you don't have to worry too much about skills with this. You can just focus on survivability and take those hits, self-sustain. If you're looking to play solo with this guy, it's definitely not the fastest game clear, but overall, I think you would have a very decent time. You'll run into issues where you get monsters that shotgun with projectiles, or even bosses that just are not melee friendly whatsoever, giving you some troubles. But as long as you're stacking that damage reduction, and maybe even playing around with retribution, just reflecting that damage back every time you're hit, can definitely add up. I could probably see retribution starting to scale into like the high 30s, maybe 40s and 50s when you start working in the, I believe it's either the priest or the preacher skill tree. So that's the paladin. And so let's quickly jump over to the priest. So if you haven't already noticed, there was a little bit of a theme. It's not that healing characters are bad. It is more in the fact that priest is a little bit low for me, especially right at the start, due to the fact that all of his skills are actually pretty terrible before you get to, I would say, probably tier 3. You're just going to find a lot of times that you're either too squishy or some of the mechanics are actually really terrible in the beginning. Endless potential is that, oh yeah, and of course the first thing I get to show you is the unlimited mana. So right now my priest is Iron Man, running around just shooting the laser beam at everyone. You know, this is not the typical way that you would play the priest. Definitely not this fun. But so this beam that I'm shooting, it does increased ticking damage. Everything is dying in one hit, so it's kind of hard to show you ticks, but does a decent amount of damage at the cost of a pretty high upkeep. So if we look at the skill itself, right now at level 3, it does 31 damage per tick, but it heals 4 health plus 1% of their max health as long as you have it going. There is a little bit of a build-up, so you can't just flick it and expect to get a ton of healing, a ton of mana economy, probably very intentional programming. The next ability that you get is Consecrated Ground. So that's that little circle that I dropped on the ground. While you're standing inside, it doesn't really do anything. 2 enemies, though, at level 1, it does, I believe it's 16 magical damage per tick. And so the main takeaway from this is when you have mobs standing in this circle, you can only have one circle up at a time. The damage that you deal to people while in the circle, so as soon as you leave the circle, any of the damage that you do is not linked back to you. So once I start actually standing in the circle doing damage, that's when everything's starting to tick up and heal you. So it's a little bit weird. The circle is put down. It's definitely not meant for the priest to stand in. It's for you to drop in for other people to go into. Just, you know, priests are not melee friendly at all in the beginning. So the other skill that I do not have yet is a AoE effect that is both a buff and a debuff. To debuff to enemies around you, buff to your allies. So it debuffs by slowing down your enemies by, I think it scales up to like 40 or 50% by the time you hit tier 5. But the damage reduction is, I believe it's like 30%. So it's quite good. It's definitely a very supportive aspect of the priest class. Realistically, you're not doing any of the front line at all. The melee, the primary attack, which I kind of just skipped over, and of course they're giving me nothing but good mana items and attack damage is this little plinging. It's super difficult to aim. It's maybe a slight AoE, so it's not super reliable. But 9 times out of 10, you are standing behind someone using your little pong 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 attack just to get extra chip in while you're waiting for your mana to regen. Not the best ability, but it's, I don't know, better than nothing, I guess, right? As we look towards the passives that these classes get, as I just kind of blindly run in to this issue, the reason why I can tank this and not think even twice about being so reckless compared to maybe someone like the Ranger or even the Paladin, while you have unlimited mana, you also have unlimited mana shield. So, Divine Protection, at the early stages, it's horrible. Like, the first stage is you get 30% damage taken as mana, but for every point of damage that you take as mana, it uses up 4 mana. So if you imagine that you're taking 30 damage, you're gonna save yourself 9 damage in health, and use up, 36 mana in the process, and that's just one hit. You know, you still gotta survive the other barrage, the 3 arrows, the other 3... Ooh, ran out of mana. The other 3 little acid blobs coming towards you. So, it's definitely... early on, it really sucks. But as you can see, I'm at level 3, so Divine Protection level 2 bumps it up to 35% of incoming damage at a cost of 2 mana per second. Still completely unreasonable. You're just going to be choking down your potions and trying to get as much regen as possible just to be constantly out of mana. On top of that, people are going to wondering, like, well, do you have enough mana to heal me before I run in? And you're kind of like, well, I mean, I took 2 hits, so we're going to have to wait a little bit. See, you know, this priest, I think, is level 7. So he has a fair bit of mana regen already. But if you're looking here, like, as I'm eating all these damage ticks, like, that regen is just not coming up. There's no way I'm going to get the damage reduction bonus or damage reduction ability or consecrated ground off if I'm taking, like, poison ticks, right? But as we get to 3, and it's 40% of incoming damage at a cost of 1 mana per damage absorbed. So if you're, back to the example, taking 30 damage, you're going to absorb 12 damage at the cost of 12 mana. Well, suddenly that's a lot more reasonable, especially if you have the regen to support it. Stage 4 is 45%, and it only costs 0.75 mana. So that's what? 13.5 at the cost of, I don't know, 10 mana, right? So it's like, it incrementally gets better until you get to the point where the shield absorbs 50% of the incoming damage at a cost of 0.5 mana per second. At that point, transition the priest into a tank, basically. You know, you are going to be focused on survivability, keeping your party alive, with less worry about keeping yourself alive. And that's going to be huge, especially when you get to stages where you find ghosts that mana burn you. There are way more sources of damage, way more bigger swarms of mobs coming towards you that hit harder. Your survivability is just as important as your allies' survivability. And then, of course, Remedy is the passive. There's 4 tiers. Each one scales up the priest's healing. I guess the effects that heal the priest become more effective. And I think it caps out at... actually, this one I'll have to double check. It's either like 75 or 100% by the time you get to the end. And then the final one, which of course I don't have here because I would really love Tier 4 to show you this. You have 2 little orbs floating around you that randomly shoot lasers at people. So it's kind of like auto-target, free damage. But when you do your laser beam attack, it focuses on whatever you're shooting. So the main thing that you're going to have to take away here is to activate this level 3 skill, it costs 5 mana per second. And incrementally, you jump up. I think by the time you hit level 5, it's going to be 52. So it's probably about a 26 damage difference between level 1 Holy Light and level 5 Holy Light. Though, when you have 2 orbs for the first rank, and especially 3 orbs for the second rank, the 3 orbs do, I believe, 12 damage each, which means you're hitting for 36 damage per second. You know, being able to run around and just constantly do that DPS is way more sustainable than just ranking up Holy Light to 5, for example. Sure, you're missing out on a little bit of the extra healing, but if you're thinking about a mana regen economy, sometimes you might want to keep that Holy Light at 1 or 2 just so you can sustain properly. So that is the Priest in a nutshell. Very co-op oriented. I definitely wouldn't recommend doing a Priest solo playthrough unless you just hate yourself and you want to go as slow as possible and then just sit around waiting to regen. But yeah, so moving on from the Priest, now we're going to take a look at the Rogue. If you're wondering why I'm in town, I have died so many times with this Rogue. It was kind of my original gripe with the class. It's very evasion focused, but not only is it very evasion focused, the primary damage dealing that you're going to be doing is your auto attack. So you're going to be chopping away, always making sure that you're within chopping distance, but also making sure that you're always constantly moving so you're not getting auto attacked by the first slime or skeleton that walks up to you. So each attack is 2 chops. I think right now each chop does 8 damage. Yeah. And right now my movement speed is decreased by 50% while I'm attacking. So this is going to be the majority of your leading people away motion. I don't know. Get used to it. Get used to box stepping just to kill everything that you can. Because unlike the Paladin, when you're in melee, the Rogue doesn't have the same damage reduction. You're going to be constantly in fear of getting shotgunned by projectiles, getting first frame hits from things like dashing skeletons. So just be aware of that playstyle when you're playing the Rogue. The first active ability that you get is a AoE shotgun of daggers. Obviously it's not as cool when you're super far away, but when you're right up in the face of a target, you know, all 6 of my daggers hit it. And so when you're looking at targets like, I don't know, the gauntlet cube to skip steps, when you're looking at boss killers, you know, it's definitely a nice quality of life being able to just run up, spend all of your mana to get a hefty chunk of the boss's life out of the way, and then start doing DPS. There are actual sets and items that increase your damage the less mana that you actually have. So for a primary attack focused class, it actually works quite well. There's not too much you need as a rogue for mana, and more for the fact that if you pick up the occasional mana regen item, you'll find that you'll hit 30 mana pretty quickly if you ever need to use your smoke bomb. So the smoke bomb, kind of just jumping around, smoke bomb will drop a AoE cloud. Anything that gets hit by the AoE cloud is stunned. First rank is 2 seconds, I believe. So for 2 seconds, everything is stunned, and you can beat things up as you feel necessary. But while you're in the dungeon, it leaves kind of a lingering smoke cloud, if you see that there. While you're in the lingering smoke cloud, you get an extra 10% evasion. So it's, you know, another place that you can stack more evasion. And honestly, the more evasion that you can get for the thief, the better off you probably are. Now, the reason why I kind of skipped over the grappling hook and went straight to the cloud is, it's not that I'm not a big fan of the grappling hook, it's just, I don't know. I have an inkling suspicion that it's gotten me killed more times than it's been useful. So on almost the same kind of pixel density that a ranger arrow has to hit its target, you are going to grapple to your target, to your nearest surface, nearest wall, nearest tower. While you're traveling, your evasion rate is 100%, so you don't have to worry about taking damage. But when you land where you need to be, there's only a small kind of AoE that is actually getting stunned by this. So if you look at that, I'm not stunning this soldier, but I bet if I do this, no, I can't even prove it. You get a small little AoE where it's stunned, so it'll stun a small group, but everything outside that group is still gonna just come straight towards you. It's gotten me killed quite a few times in the prison, and even more once you get past the prison, so not a huge fan, but still, the DPS from the rogue is good. Thief is good. As you look towards the passives, let's just hit up the guild, the trainer Calhoun. So the first one that you get is sidestep, so 5% evasion against all incoming damage, guarantees evasion against one damage instance that recharges every 5 times. So every 5 seconds you get a free whiff, 100%. It's good when you need to get into situations where you need to close a gap, or bite the bullet and try to only take one hit to get out of bad situations. But otherwise, like, that flat evasion is going to be just as good as that free whiff. And then when we get to step 5, it's 25% evasion against all incoming damage, and then that recharge time is down to 3 seconds. The second passive that you get is towards your twin daggers. Each stack of twin daggers will give you 2% attack speed. So that was that little purple dagger. Let's see if I can shortcut over here. So look in the bottom right hand corner, you see those little stacks going up. So each one of those stacks is 2%. 2%? 2%. So 32% attack speed is pretty nice. I would imagine that 64% attack speed will be, I don't know, math, twice as better. Might be a little difficult to sustain that on, say, like a boss, where the majority of the bosses are going to be able to hit you. The golem, the pig are the easiest ones that I can think of. So usually, to make the best of this, you're going to see hitting your max stacks a lot more with general mobs. But moving on, the final passive, which I can't show you because I don't have tier 4 of the Guildmaster, is Vicious Cuts. So each hit with Twin Daggers will have a 5% chance of lowering the target's current health by 5%, and then the other one is 10% chance to lower it by 5%. So for those of you who have kind of been around since the Diablo 2 era, there was something called Crushing Blows, or the static shock ability. So you're taking out those static amounts of health. Crushing Blow with Paladins, for example, was definitely, I don't know, a ton of fun. Just being able to keep knocking down the health until you get to a point where you can just damage it with regular abilities. Cuts down the time that you need to kill bosses, rares, by a huge chance, especially when you consider the fact that your twin daggers are attacking 64% faster at 2 slashes per click. Things are just going to evaporate. So, can't say enough. Rogues are definitely, I don't know, they're definitely a beast when it comes to killing rare mobs and bosses. You do have to be very aware of your evasion stack, total evasion, and whether or not you're going to be a liability if you're running into bosses hoping to dodge and just getting unlucky and ending up a pool on the floor. Like I had mentioned in another episode, you only get one pickup, and when you pick up, you are linked until you find a graveyard to unlink each other. And more often I was finding that with my rogue, I was the one dying in co-op. So be careful. Melee isn't for everyone, but for those who can excel with it, I think the rogue is pretty fantastic. Moving on, the next class I'm going to review is the Wizard. Now, very important. I said Wizard, not Sorcerer. For people who are probably familiar with D&D, they might go, well, yeah, of course, a Wizard is different than a Sorcerer. But you kind of have to think about it for a little while. And just with the makers of Hammerwatch, the biggest difference between the two is one focuses on fire and the other focuses on ice. So here is the fire guy. Definitely a big source of dots and abilities that just do a lot of I would almost just call it like DPS throughput. So if you see, I'm just roasting my targets. Let's go to the cube so I can show you a little bit better. So the auto attack is a little bit of an AoE. It's nothing to really call home about. The fireball deals 10 magic damage, and so it's just kind of it's like the priest's ability. It gets you where you need to be and helps you do enough damage that you don't have to really think twice about using it if you're low on mana. Now, having said that, the first ability that you get is that flamethrower, the flame breath that I was doing earlier. Shoots magic damage in a cone. Much like the thief's ability, is the ability for you to just kind of straight on just pump people with damage or do like a little sweep and catch people with damage. Now, the little fire icon over the heads of those mobs isn't that ability. It's actually a passive called Combustion. So each wizard skill inflicts burning damage over time, dealing, I believe it's up to 16 damage per second for, 4 seconds, let's say. You're probably better off looking at that wiki. But yeah, so when you're doing stuff like this, you can get all your mobs out and then just, so if I have 80 mana, so 85 mana. So one quick little sweep. I use about 10 mana for that, and I cut the skeletons in half. So it's great for doing the damage and just kind of like touch and go combat, which to me is probably a bigger part of surviving in this game. Constantly have to be moving, constantly have to be aware of where you're standing and what you're doing. The next ability that you get is called Flame Blast, and it confuses all the targets. Confusion slows the targets by 40%, and only for you does confusion screw up your controls. So left is right, right is left, up is down, down is up. But this also plays into, I don't even know why I tried to just do active skills in a row. The second passive ability that you get is a flame shield. So when you take damage, if you can afford to take damage, it will automatically shoot your flame blast out. Once again, slowing those targets and doing that damage. And it recharges every 8 seconds. Yeah, first level is 8 seconds. I believe it goes down to 5. That first damage that I was supposed to take was supposed to be reduced by 20%, and then the final rank gives you 50%. So it's pretty much all that you're going to get when it comes to the wizard in terms of safety as a built-in mechanic. Outside of that, you're purely a glass cannon. Can't take any hits. This wizard is a little bit low. Like, I believe he's only level 4. That was quite on purpose. Just because I might as well just stay in town and show you. Only some of the cooler abilities are probably worth going down and talking about. So, of course, Blast Wave. The damage isn't too incredible. At the final stage, you're doing 30 damage in that AoE, but they're slowed by that 60% instead of the 30%. Yeah. So it's nice. It gives a little bit of crowd control that you really need early on, uh, especially when you start looking at the other abilities. The one ability that I have here, Meteor Shower, does 160 damage per impact. And you might be thinking, oh wow, that's pretty good for clearing out an area. Not so much. The biggest problem that I have with Meteor Shower is, yes, it does a boatload of damage. At tier 5, like each one of those meteors, 7 meteors, hits for 320 hybrid damage. So when you use it, you're going to be smiling, ear to ear with the amount of damage that you're going to output. Sure, it's spread out around the screen a little bit more, but like the damage is good. When you're doing something like this in single play rather than co-op, where you have someone to hide behind, I've been killed so many times trying to kite mobs in and then drop the meteor, being unable to move or do anything. Like I'm not exaggerating here. You can't move until all those meteors are out. So you're waiting for 7 meteors to land before you're able to move, and most skeletons can close that gap. So you just have to be really careful when you play this style. Totally glass cannon. Very careful about playing this solo. If you're going to play solo, you might want to focus on abilities where you can just touch and go, doing that fire breath, shooting that 13 damage per tick cone in front of you. Making use of that instead. So once again, getting back to that flame shield protection, 20% damage reduction up to 50%, and recharges every 5 seconds. The final ability, which is kind of more into that play of touch and go style, is Scorched Earth. So all the wizard skills, including the auto attack, leave burning danger area on the ground that deals, in this case, 8 magic damage per second, and the max level is 16 magic damage per second. The duration of the danger area is doubled, which 16 damage per second doesn't sound like a lot, but in mobs where you catch them standing still, can kite around a corner, make them walk that path to get to you, is the difference between fighting a mob at 100% and then fighting the mob at 60%, 50%. So definitely a lot of DPS, definitely a lot of sustained DPS. But I mean, I am level 6, and my max HP right now is 55. I could barely even give you the example of the Blast Wave shield. So if you're looking towards this sort of like glass cannon play style, you're going to be looking at a priest style again. You do a ton of damage. You're going to be needing to take it very slow, unless you're willing to find a buddy and play co-op. But yeah, that's the wizard. So let's move on to the counterpart. The sorcerer. I'm just going to give myself a head start. Let's make this look a little nicer. Just kind of giving you an example of the gameplay as I prep it. I guess I kind of skipped over. This is the fountain that you can unlock in the second stage of the town. It's really good for getting those EXP bonuses, the gold bonuses. Definitely quality of life when you're considering all you're really doing is adding more mobs to the floor. Hopefully we can find a nice healthy room. The primary attack for the sorcerer is this nice ricochet attack. First stage, I think you only get a first one bounce, but as you get further in, it's just kind of like auto aim. It's kind of what drew me to play this as my second character and subsequently my co-op character. It's mindless. You don't have to aim. You don't have to worry about precision. If I was playing with a controller, you would highly bet that this is going to be the class that I want to play, because you can just bounce off walls. You can catch the magic angles. Let me see if I can catch some magic angles with these. So you see right as I hit this corner, I'm getting that little bounce mark. That little bounce mark, if a mob is coming up, it'll shoot behind me, it'll shoot around me. It's just the most... I don't even know what to get. It's the most forgiving gameplay that you can get with your primary attack. Love it to pieces. Definitely was probably the safest way to play for me. But yeah, I guess enough gushing about how fun just being able to walk around and ricochet damage all the mobs on the screen are. The first active ability that you get is this ice meteor, more professionally called a comet. So, smush, right? I think this is either the first or the second rank, Comet 3. So it drops 120 hybrid damage, that's magic and physical, split among all the enemies at the area of the impact, and subsequently freezing them for a duration. I think the max duration is like 2.5 seconds. Really good for single target damage. So, excuse me, I had to think about stuff for a second there. So if you're just focusing on regular auto attacks, regular auto attacks, fighting bosses, jeez, I'm tired. So when you're fighting bosses, just being able to do that extra hit, it cranks up in damage pretty decently. I think the max rank is 240 damage, but when you only cost 35 mana, I mean, it's probably the as spammable as like most of the abilities that you can get. The only downside is it is that preset distance from the mobs, so I can't target it on top of myself. I have to aim that safety distance away. So positioning is important, I guess, but otherwise it's pretty decent. The next one that we get is called I don't know, it's kind of like an Icicle Nova, more called Frost Nova. If you played any other game that had a Frost Nova, you'll be completely surprised when your Frost Nova shoots out little balls. So it's more like Icicle Ball Nova. But if you could see there, the Icicle Ball Nova ricochets, so it'll bounce off and then go towards whatever target that you're looking at. So if I can find an area that has mobs, just being a part of that whole forgiving system, you can back yourself into a corner and then have every ball, almost every ball, bounce out and hit the target that you're intending to try and kill. You know, it's such a forgiving ability. It's like the auto aim that you get with the regular attack. It's fantastic. The more you level it up, the more projectiles you get. The balls don't do as much damage. I think it only scales maybe 2 at a time. But still, it's for the mana cost, it's, you know, nothing to overlook. The last ability, the more flashy ability, is the Frozen Orb. And for people who used to play Diablo 2, it's just kind of a homage to one of the most iconic abilities that you could get. Right? So you're shooting that little frozen orb, and it is just going through, and it is cleaning house. You know, whatever it's in its way doesn't matter. A little bit better than probably other games that have similar features. Like if you were a if you were a sorceress in Diablo 2, and you fired the frozen orb into the wall, you know, you'd lose the frozen orb. In this system, if you bounce it off the wall, it's just going to bounce right back. So it's kind of nice to be able to bounce it off to a wall and kind of keep all those projectiles in the same area doing damage. So I wouldn't say that this class has the best DPS, but what it does have is the most... I'd put it about on par with the Rogue in terms of crowd control. The first passive that you get is Biting Chill. So source of skills slow enemies by 20% for 2 seconds. They also have a 7.5% chance to freeze enemies for 1.25 seconds. And obviously this, I believe it scales up to 2.25 seconds. The chance to freeze is 15%, and the slow, I believe, only goes up to 45%, I believe. Double check. Either way, it's, nothing to laugh at. The second ability that you get is called Ice Barrier. When you cast a skill, you get a protective barrier that lasts for 2.5 seconds. Each barrier reduces the damage taken by one damage instance up to 20%, stacks up to 5 times. Very important. This is, you get 5 stacks of 20% damage taken per instance. So if I'm dropping all these, and of course I don't have the mana to get it there. So 3, 4, 5, 9, 9, 9. I'm not blocking up to 100 damage. It's just charges. As you level it up further, you're going to get more charges. The damage deduction is going to be more. With this one, we're just going to shortcut back to town. We didn't find any ore anyways. So, we have the barrier, last 2.5 seconds, 5 stacks of 20%, 6 stacks of 30%, 7 stacks of 40%, and then 8 stacks of 50%. So this is where, I wouldn't say a lot more survivability, but definitely better survivability than the wizard. You're running around with those 8 stacks, taking half damage. You can take probably a shotgun better than half the characters in this game, just by getting to that tier 5 ice barrier. The final skill that you get is Shatter. So when you kill a target while it's frozen, it'll explode, dealing 40 hybrid damage to nearby enemies. And then the next stage is 80 damage to nearby enemies. And you're thinking, well, it's not really good for single target. No, it's for those instances where you're running through an entire room of mobs, and you kill one, and all you're really looking for is that chain reaction that explodes and just clears out a room. Maybe more oriented towards the first 3 stages, but in any case, it's definitely one of my favorite aspects of this build, is just clear speed and single target. Like I said, not the best single target, but it does enough that I felt safe to play this as my solo character, and eventually just rolled it into my co-op character because, hey, the less we die, the farther we get to progress. So that's the Sorcerer. Definitely one of my more favorited classes, but the one that I'm saving for you for the very last, of course, is the Warlock. Now, my little white-haired, tealed, robed Warlock, I don't know, maybe doesn't look too scary. I mean, what really looks scary when you're, I don't know, 16 pixels tall? His main attack, his auto attack. Yeah, why don't we just jump into this? His auto attack both applies soul consumption to your target, and for each tick that it ticks, you regain, I believe it's 5% mana and 5% health at the first stage. So this is probably one of the only characters that has like the best sustain in terms of health and mana regeneration. First active ability you get is kind of a little thrown AoE lightning cloud. It hits up to 6 times. Pretty nice. I find that most of the time I find it doesn't do enough damage in an AoE setting to be spammable like some of the other abilities. But that's probably because with respect to the other abilities, it doesn't even shine nearly as good. So the second activatable ability is called Gargoyle. And what gargoyles do is they sit in place, shooting bolts of lightning around them. So at level 1, they deal 20 damage per bolt of lightning. The gargoyle lasts 5 seconds, but the gargoyles can be linked together to create a static link that does 50% of that damage and stuns enemies. At rank 1, you only get 2, but at rank 3, rank 4 starts at tier 2. Rank 4, you get 5 gargoyles. So 1 gargoyle, 2 gargoyles. And so obviously the longer you have them, the more they stand out in terms of damage that they do. Let's just clean up a little bit. Okay. So, what are we getting at when we talk about how the Warlock is, to me, almost like the king of DPS in terms of just like burst? So, like I said, you have those gargoyles and they shoot lightning. You can link them together. The third active ability, though, is Eye of the Storm. It generates lightning bolts centered on you that deal 24 magic damage per second, per tick, sorry. Storm lasts for 7 seconds, but the lightning can be linked with nearby gargoyles. So if you have 2 gargoyles down, and let me just chug a potion as I do this. Oops. I just sent that cube from probably the 3rd stage to the last stage pretty quickly. So I guess I can show you in town because it's just as simple having unlimited mana. So you go gargoyle, gargoyle, lightning storm. And so you're pumping a lot of damage out. Now the cooldown on Thunderstorm might deter people from spamming it, but I mean, it gets to a point where just the duration is so long that you're just pumping out DPS. Especially if you're not the focus and you're able to get these little pokes in, you're regenerating mana and health like it's going out of style. You'll never run out. I'm not saying you'll never die, but in terms of running out, the sustain is just huge. So to complement this, in terms of passive skills, you have Extended Domain. So the effective range of all Warlock skills are extended by 15%. This includes the Soul Dagger. So it's not huge. Like, you're not getting a full frontal 270 degree arc like you would with the Paladin. But it's good enough that if you're thinking 75% range is good enough, especially when you want to link static, when you want to link Thunderstorm to your gargoyles. The screen is your domain. So it's fantastic. The second passive ability you get is Soul Cleaver. So when I do that soul consumption, Soul Dagger applies soul consumption every time you poke people. And yeah, so the tier 1 is 5% health per damage dealt and 10% mana per damage dealt up until 20 magical damage per second. So it's not, obviously they planned out this far enough that you're not just infinitely gaining mana and life back, but in terms of sustain, just gorgeous. So when your soul consumption is on a target, the damage will spread 50% of that damage to nearby enemies. So you have, you poke once and you're doing 10 damage per tick. If you get more magic damage, then you're scaling that up even more. So, nice little effect. I wouldn't say it's the best, but when you're considering that it's soul consumption and you're getting HP and mana back, like, it's just, I don't know. I think I'm just personally falling in love with the Warlock. My buddy plays the Warlock, and quite honestly, it's just kind of like, he loves playing Warlocks, he likes playing Necromancers in every game, so, I don't know. I love that he wants to play my favorite character, so why not? The final stage, though, the icing on the cake, is Stormlash. all bolts of lightning have a 25% chance to trigger a new bolt of lightning, dealing 25% of the damage. And then obviously 50%, 50%. So that lightning storm, that mess of a DPS burst that we were doing on that one guard statue is effectively going to double, I would say, with that 50% chance. 5 gargoyles plus the Warlock's source is just, if you have the mana pool and you have the mana regeneration, you are just pumping everything in sight, but you also get the ability of just throwing down these gargoyle statues and just walking away. You know, let people walk into those gargoyle statues and do the work for you. Don't be a rogue. Don't stand there and pump enemies if you don't have to. Quite honestly, this was the third character that I went to after trying to get a feel for all the classes, and I loved it. Like, I just absolutely loved it. This is probably going to be the class that I would take solo, just because, like, health pool is big, mana pool is big, damage potential is big, sustain is incredible. Overall, you know, save the best till last. Warlock is my favorite class. So that's it, you guys. Thank you for tuning in. We are going to fast forward a little bit. This is a different profile. I have the town, and I will do maybe a brief look into the town before we jump into our next setting. But I'm about 20 ore in, and based on the fact that I get maybe about 3 or 4 ore per run, I probably saved you guys about 3 hours of video. If you missed me, thank you, but I'd appreciate it more if you leave a comment on what I can improve in the video. And like I said, leave a like if you like the video, leave a thumbs down and a comment for why you hate it. But otherwise, if you can, hit that subscribe button, and thanks for watching. Bye for now.